What's up, YouTube? So, if y'all saw the tweets or post in the Discord yesterday, had a pretty good day with Dimir, and thought I would go ahead and show the recordings of at least the first league. We got two ready to go, but I wanted to try out these friendly leagues. If you want to know, Magic Online added friendly leagues back into the rotation, so you can pay like 60 play points instead of 100. Um, and you get it's a lower cost of entry, lower prize payout, but competition's still pretty good. It's more just so you can like stretch out more money a longer ways. Um, so if you're wanting to play a bunch of leagues, grind a bunch of matches, but you don't want to pay the entry fee to the normal leagues, and the friendlies might be a place for you. Just because it says friendly does not mean it's a bunch of pushover decks. I can tell you that from watching other people play them, from trying it myself, and yeah, it's a wild wild west. So thought I'd run through the experience there for this first league. Playing Dimir, obviously, I was running a little low on play points. Thought I'd try to get a few in the bank, and Dimir, like I've always said, has been the most consistent for me recently. Probably what I'll be playing in the Showcase Challenge. So thought we'd just go ahead and start there, kind of narrow down the list a little bit for the weekend. Um, the only real big things of note are instead of the fourth mURktide Regent, running the first Brazen Borrower. Um, Rest of the main. Cut the Archmage's Charm for a second dress down in the main, and the Shadow of Mortalities. So, kind of see how those go. In the sideboard, this first league, I didn't get a shot of the list, but the only difference between the first and the second is this first league, I actually have a fatal push in the sideboard over the second Hercules recall and something else. Or actually, I might have the second Hercules recall. It might just be fatal push over the second engineered explosives. And that's what it was. The second dress down got moved to the main for second Hercules recall, and the fatal push got moved for second engineered explosives. And it's mainly because if you've played in any of the leagues recently, like yesterday, today, recently, then you've probably seen a lot of these Asmo food decks running around with Samwise Gamgee and EE Hercules Recall, both excellent against those. But anyway, round one, keep a one lander with a Wraith and a Consider. See some crab action. So we're up against Mill. Have this ability to get down a turn 2 8/8 mURktide, so I can't really pass that. Like, shut off, drown in the lock. Don't have to fetch to turn on Archive Trap. Picking up that third land means I get to just like start holding up Counterspell. And I'm not really afraid of Tasha's because we got mURktide Regent, we've got Street Wraith, we've got Shadow of Mortality. So like our CMC is high, even if the cost of playing them is fairly low. But all I really want to do is hit these land drops, hold up these counter spells, and go from there. The Shadow doesn't really matter because the mURktide is just going to fly over. If I couldn't hold up both my counter spells, my stub and my counter spell, then I wouldn't play out the Shadow there. But because I can, it's pretty free. Sideboarding, boarding out some Street Wraiths. Not all of them. So I do think it's a bit of a mistake to board out like all of your Street Wraiths because they do help enable both your Shadow and your mURktide if your opponent doesn't mill you too aggressively. So I would be careful there, but boarding out a couple of them is fine. Here, just trying to do my part to play around Archive Trap a little bit. Like, there's no guarantee I'm going to be able to play around it, but I might as well try. Obviously, if my opponent forces the issue with something like an ensnaring bridge, then I got to respect that. And then as soon as they don't hit me with an archive trap, then I know I'm going to be fetching shock and getting the shadow down and kind of relying on my counter magic. Tasha's catches a Flusterstorm. I could just let the Tashas go and save the Flusterstorm, but now that they've got things like Jace, was it Jace Perfected Mind? I just saw Ensnaring Bridge. Then there's probably less targets for this Flusterstorm than I want. So I kind of want to just tag whatever I can with it. And here we got the double Drown in the Lock against the double Counter Spell. So down to 3 cards. They probably don't have that many ways of interacting with Shadow. So we're just going to hope we can find a fetch land. Nope. All right. Take Visions of Beyond to cut off the most draws, and just hope our opponent doesn't top deck a push or a Drown in the Lock. Tasha's is fine. No push. On to game number 2. Very clean win. That game 1 getting to play an 8/8 mURktide on turn 2. Chef's kiss. All right, so Malakir Mire means it's probably Scam. That's a rebirth effect if you didn't know, or an undying effect, whatever you want to call it. So turn 2, Thoughtseize and Scam of Fury. That's pretty rough. Like this double drown fatal push, not doing too much in the face of a Scam Fury. I also have to be a little weary of like Black Cleave Cliffs or uh, something like that into Blood Moon here. But really, I'm just hoping my opponent will like put something on the stack for me to fight over. Trust down, just try to get something going on. I could have taken 8, but kind of like we saw there, they didn't end up putting a card in the yard before Fable, so I wouldn't have been able to counter it anyway. Do, however, have to counter a Ragavan. And I'm just hoping, like, hey, discard a card, do something on your turn. Help me, help me, help you to drown and lock this Fury. So opponent's got 1 card in hand. We don't want them scamming a Fury, and I can't kill it in response to the Fable, so I gotta just kill the Fable. Shadow of Mortality does trade with the Fury, but doesn't trade very well with a Lightning Bolt. So game 2, sideboarding against Scam, usually like trimming on Thoughtseize and Street Wraith for the most part. Boarding in like Unlicensed Hearse, boarding in Shieldred's Edict. Those are kind of the big ones. So we got turn 1, Scam of Grief. Take Fatal Push and probably Shadow of Mortality, because like Hearse doesn't do much if you've already got the Grief down, but nope, I'm gonna take the Hearse. So we take a hit off this Grief, and then maybe we can get down Shadow next turn. But I'd rather find like some interaction for the Grief. So I'll probably end up taking like 2 or 3 hits and then getting down Shadow. Maybe not. All right. Fatal Push. Fatal Push. All right. Shadow's pretty good because at least I can like fetch and shock a few times, get down Shadow of Mortality and Death Shadow, and just put like a bunch of power on board. Obviously, if they've got a Fatal Push for the Shadow or a Terminate for the Shadow of Mortality, I'm in some trouble, but can't play around everything. Definitely not attacking since I can't produce lethal. To psych out a Grief here with holding this Misty Rainforest in hand. All right. Let's pause for a second right here. So I have the option here to hold up, dress down, like pass the turn, hold up, dress down. I've got the option to attack, and if they don't block, I kill them. I have the option to, yeah, pretty much do a few different things. So if my opponent has lightning bolt, they have a pretty good case for not using it last turn or any of the earlier turns. So if I attack and they like chump block one of these and lightning bolt me, then they can attack back for lethal, and I'm dead. So I can't beat a lightning bolt. If I don't attack and they just attack with both of their guys, lightning bolt still kills me. You see where I'm going with this? So if I can't beat a lightning bolt, I can't beat a removal spell on one of my guys because then I'm just dead on board. Then my best shot is to not give my opponent extra draw steps if I can help it. If I attack with both and they just block one, then I'm at the mercy of lightning bolt that I'm already at the mercy of. If I attack with both and for some reason they don't block, then I dress down and that's 20 on the dot and we win. We sneak out of here with a win. I could dress down first to see if I draw something relevant, like a lightning bolt, or not a lightning bolt, a fatal push, to where they would have to block. But I would have to go down to 5, dress down, draw into a fatal push, or I'd have to fetch first, dress down. If I draw into a fatal push, then I push like the 4/3 grief. I attack with both. They have to block, and I'm at the mercy of whatever they got on their turn. But I lose the element of surprise. I like lose the ability to just, oops, I win right here. So if you've seen the stream, you know I'm a big fan of taking the line that gives you a chance to oops, I win. And I do think my opponent like should have blocked there in some capacity, but didn't. I just think I put something on top of the library and kept it there. I think that should be a sign like things aren't going to go that well if you don't block. But either way, game 3, fatal push or rag. I was kind of expecting an undying effect, but didn't see one. So that does make my life a lot better now that I've got dress down up, another fatal push. Consider if they have like a Fable of the Mirror Breaker, I can stub. I bet you thought I was going to dress down that. I am not. We're actually going to throw away this dress down. Mainly because we picked up actual factual counter spells, so we can fight over an evoke elemental instead of just like trying to stop a trigger. But I'm kind of hoping that if they didn't have like a Scam Fury by now, they just don't have one. Turns out they did have a Terminate, so boo on them. But now that we've got enough cards in the yard for Kroxa, I can basically never tap off of Counterspell or some sort of interaction for Kroxa. But at the same time, if that's how they spend their entire turn, then I at least get to stop that and then like untap, reset a little bit. Nope. Phone alarm going off. Stop it. Alright. Fury's absolutely catching a counter spell because I cannot beat that with my current hand. Shadow of Mortality is decent, but my life total is a little bit high. So I at least have this extra fatal push to fight over Kroxa coming back. Fable also a lot less scary when your opponent's got no cards in hand. And they choose not to discard. So really wonder what they got if they're not discarding with Fable. Probably like another Terminate would be my big guess. So mURktide could be a really good choice here. Hey, look, another Terminate. I don't want you terminating my mURktide. So one more card in the yard, and they can get back the Croxa. Should be a little bit unfortunate. Slightly less unfortunate in the face of double Death Shadow. So my opponent's got to find something to go to the graveyard to get back Croxa. If they do get back Croxa, they're dead in the air to the mURktide. Another Grief is fine. Doesn't really affect anything. My opponent is still dead in the air to mURktide. I'm not double blocking the Grief. I could, because escaping Croxa, like, again, doesn't kill me, but I just don't want to put more cards in my opponent's graveyard if I don't have to. And then this fetch and shock here is only because it gives 2 lethal attackers, which I know they don't have any cards in hand. I know they don't have a way of interacting, but better safe than sorry. All right, so this is match number 3, I think. On the draw against what looks like blue-red mURktide. No second land, no second land. Oof. Pretty low on life, but at least I can play a shadow if I want to. Counterspell the Thoughtseize, opponent dash Ragavan again. And this is kind of a very, very weird ending to this game. I put a Death Shadow on the stack, and if you see my opponent's timer, they proceed to time out. Just inactivity timeout. Which I have to add like an asterisk somewhere for matches like that. Somebody talked about it in chat like several weeks ago, about players editing like videos for YouTube, splicing together leagues, um, stuff like that. And I don't like doing that. I have no interest in like splicing together leagues. So if there is an opponent disconnecting, if there's an opponent punting, if there's me punting, it's going to be live like in the video. So don't feel like I'm going to give you a an unfair representation of what the deck's doing. This is what the deck's doing. If I end up like trophying a league because my opponent disconnected, it's in here. There is no bluffing. You get what you get. All right, so Flooded Strand go. Rogan Triumph could mean like an Omnath pile. There's no Kahira, so it's probably not Elementals or Blue-White Control. Another fetch land's really good. So now we've got Counterspell, Stubborn Denial for like a Teferi. They did shock in this Temple Garden, so I'm kind of thinking it's either Leyline Binding, because that does give them 4 land types for binding, so it would cost 2. It could also mean like an Eladamri's Call. We'll see what they got. Seiju. So really not sure what they've got, but I'm just going to be kind of conservative here. I could triple fetch and play out a shadow, but I run the risk of like them having end of turn interaction into untap interaction. So I kind of want them to make the first move here, which is what they do. So now I have the ability to like fetch shock a bunch, dismember this Risen Reef, untap, play a land, and have the ability to play a shadow with double protection backup, which I hope will be enough. I'm kind of expecting like a Solitude and something else, maybe like a Solitude EOT or Prismatic Ending or Leyline Binding into Solitude on their turn. And if I can fight through that, then maybe I have a chance to like untap with Drown in the Lock, and that gives me enough ways of interacting that I can kind of get there. We're going to pending the Solitude, the Elodomery's call for, or pending the Prismatic Ending, the Elodomery's call for a Solitude. Like I said, now I get to untap with a Shadow. I've got Drown in the Lock back up. If they didn't go for another Solitude right there, then I'm assuming they either don't have the Solitude or they don't have the white card. Either way, great for me, especially since they missed their land drop. So I'm going to play a little bit of the odds here and say, hey, if my opponent didn't have Solitude or didn't have the ability to Solitude my Shadow on their turn, then I'm just going to assume either they don't have it or I can stop it if they draw into it. So we're going to play out the Shadow Immortality, present lethal next turn, and say, like, hey, I'm going to counter uh, a hard cast like Omnath or something like that. If you just put out a chump blocker, I'll counter like a Prismatic Ending. But we just get a Risen Reef, so we're countering that. And on to game 2. Sideboarding against Elementals. Fatal Push, pretty bad because it doesn't kill any of the pitch elementals. Then stuff like Dress Down, Children's Edict definitely coming in. So we get a whole bunch of Wraiths. I'm not too worried about my life total in this matchup because typically their best way of interacting with us is Solitude. And Solitude's going to reset your life total to like 13-ish anyway. So can kind of afford to be aggressive early. All right, this was kind of a fun one. So my opponent put a Chalice of the Void on the stack. I can go for Counterspell, but they've got this Wooded Foothills sitting around. So if they have like Veil of Summer, then they veil my Counterspell, and both of my Stubborn Denials get just shut off at that point. So decide instead I'm going to go for the Soft Stub because either one, they fetch and pay for the stub, in which case I fetch and second stub it, or two, they like fetch and Veil of Summer, in which case I fetch and stub the Veil of Summer, same result. So it's either risk the Counterspell or Spell Pierce, or risk the Spell Pierce or the Veil of Summer, countering my Counterspell and my stubs both getting cut off, or just go ahead and like use both of my stubs and guarantee that I get to deal with the Chalice of the Void, as well as beat like the Veil of Summer or Spell Pierce, whatever that they have protecting it. And then I get to untap with Counterspell or Drown or whatever. But they decide not to pay and just let it go, which I don't really know what that signals to me, because I feel if you've got a way to protect this Chalice, that you're just like firing it off, or at the very least paying the one for Stubborn Denial. Like, I don't really know why you wouldn't pay the one for stub. But it is not on me to know what my pile opponents are thinking at any given time. I do also want to point out that in this league and the next one, the one in the next video, play against like the 4 or 5 color Omnath piles a lot. So if you're interested in seeing that matchup a lot, then these will be a couple good videos for you. Of note, I fetched in response to my opponent fetching, because if they fetch up a tap land and go to their turn and I want to like stubborn denial something, I'd have to fetch in response or fetch before I stubborn denial. As soon as I fetch before I shock, my shadow would be a 3/3, so it would be susceptible to lightning bolt. So when my opponent fires off the Misty there, I decide to fire off my fetch and keep the shadow around. If they hadn't have fetched, I probably wouldn't fetch, but it's kind of free to do it there. Endurance. So counter that. I don't know if they would target themselves or if they'd target me, but I think I'd rather just counter it and move on. Then counter the leyline binding. And we get to go to match number 4, I think. Yeah. So a little bit of a clunky hand. I'm really wanting to keep this because it has Drown in the Lock on the draw, or Drown in the Lock on the play. So I can hopefully interact with like a turn 1 Ragavan. But Blooming Marsh Thoughtseize does not really indicate Ragavan. But I do want to at least stop this second one so I can protect this mURktide. Usually when I see Blooming Marsh Thoughtseize, there's a very good chance that mURktide's going to be a solid card in the matchup. I didn't know about the counterspell, or no, I did know about the counterspell. I think I should have just played out a 4/4 mURktide last turn. The 4-turn clock, they'd be going down to 11 this turn. They got a cookbook so they can get food, but I think it's like very solid pressure in the air to do that. So I think that might have been a little bit of a mistake. I really don't have many like rule of thumbs regarding mURktide. Like, oh, you don't want to play a mURktide less than a 5/5 or whatever. It's usually if I'm up against something unfair, just go ahead and play out an early mURktide. Try to get aggressive on the board. If it does get into a drawn out game, there's a reasonable chance you'll draw a second mURktide to grow the first. If you're just casting your spells as the game goes on. But all right, so decide to take this hit, grow my shadow. They can, yeah, they can discard a card to cookbook to make a food to grow this other construct to a 6/6. If they sack Sling to Witch's Oven, they lose an artifact to gain an artifact, so it's net neutral. I could Fatal Push a token into turn, but don't think it matters that much. Yeah. Find another Wraith. Like my opponent is not really in a position to punish me too much. Finding a second shadow is great. If I didn't find anything relevant, I could just like play mURktide, pass, hold up Fatal Push. But because I found the second shadow, now I kind of get to do it all. Like play out the second shadow, play out the mURktide. I could Fatal Push first, but if my opponent has like an Asmo, if they go discard a card, Asmo, then I might have to like Fatal Push the Asmo. Or if they just go for like an attack first, maybe I want a Fatal Push. I just don't think this one extra point on the mURktide like really matters. I get that it's lethal in the air, but it loses all of my flexibility. So here we do see Asmo for a cookbook. saving this fatal push. They've got one card in hand. They haven't discarded a Daredevil, so I'm assuming that's not what the last card is. But saving this fatal push, I get to kind of blow out this attack here. Say blowout. They still get to deal with my my shadow. I did forget in this attack that Witch's Oven, if they sacrifice something with, I think it's like more than 4 power, they get 2 food instead of 1. So they can immediately Asmo trigger there. Or Asmo sack food, you know. The thing with the Asmo, the Asmoreno, mURktide, Sina, Kuldakar. Thoughts is just to try to clear the way because we're pretty sure it's not an overchase Daredevil. And we at least get to force the chump block with this Asmo. So opponent's got like 1 blind draw step, find something relevant. They do not. And we get to move on to game 2. Sideboarding against the food decks. Counterspell's pretty bad. Thoughtseize is pretty bad. I really want like Hurkyl's Recalls, EEs, things to help me deal with them kind of going wide. All right. Thankfully, hit the fatal push off the top for Samwise Ganji. Fortunately, did not hit the fatal push for Academy Manufacturer. All right, so I do have this cleave side of Path of Peril that I can cast. If you haven't seen, since I've added Shadow of Mortality to the deck, I wanted one more Shockland. So I was thinking about, like add a Steam Vents, whatever, doesn't really matter. So I played a league with that. In the very first match of that league, I played against, I think, mono white humans and drew Path of Peril out of the sideboard, was staring down like an Adeline and a, what's it called? Ranger Captain of Eos with like 6 lands out, including the Steam Vents. And I was like, wait, is it just completely free to play a Hallowed Fountain over a Steam Vents? Yes, it is. So swapped out the Steam Vents for the Hallowed Fountain. Now we have the ability to cleave a Path of Peril if necessary. And I will absolutely recognize way to turn here to show. So my opponent's got these Academy Manufacturers. They don't have anything that's like really scaring me with them yet. Like they don't have a cookbook. They don't have a Witch's Oven. I 100% should just fetch up a white source here, untap, attack with both of my guys, and cleave Path of Peril. Because my opponent's board state is getting really out of control. If they find anything to make a food, like a Gilded Goose, a Witch's Oven, and Underworld Cookbook, anything that makes a food just like completely wrecks me here. And I have the option to just cleave Path of Peril, exile both of the Oval Chase Daredevils to Hearse, and just like top deck a creature to kill with the Hearse. And I don't. I just like play really passively, and they end up top decking the Oven here. And that was just like a bad decision. Like they're gonna get too much value if they top deck an Oven. So just nuke the board. And just like this, end up getting a million treasures and food and clues, and yeah, I'm really not happy with my my decision making there. It's one of those moments you go back and look at it and you're just like, why? Why did I do that the way I did that? Because we could have had both these manufacturers answered. We could have had both the oval chases answered. I lose my shadow and my shadow of mortality. But I give myself the option, like if I attack and they make unfavorable blocks, like block Daredevil on my two guys, then I can just not cast the Path of Peril. Because I'm in really good shape. But if they block like manufacturer on my two guys, then I just get to cast the Path, exile the two Daredevils, and like golden from there. But now we got Asmo with 1.5 million treasure tokens, approximately. Or food tokens, sorry. So they are going to nuke my board here. I can Path of Peril, but like it's too late now. The damage has been done. We could have been in like the same spot with 2 less manufacturers, none of these clues and treasures and food. But no, we got greedy. Opponent has the ability to draw up to approximately 73 cards in hand, give or take. We, on the other hand, have the ability to draw dead. Yeah. All right. Can't fatal push anything. At this point, I'm kind of thinking like my opponent's used up more than 2/3 of their clock. So maybe they end up timing out. I never play to my opponent timing out. Like, I won't sit there and take 100 million needless game actions because I think my time's more valuable than that. But if my opponent times out because they just can't kill me fast enough, that is a very real situation. If they decide to take 1 million game actions, that's on them. So I could go for the dismember, but I would rather consider to try to find the land. Like, I think if I dismember the goose, that's great. But if I miss my second land drop because of it, then I'm never winning this game. So that will consider find the second land. I could dismember the goose, but there's not really anything that they can play for 3 mana that they couldn't just play for 2. So I decided to go for the Thoughtseize instead. We see the green dude that, like, whenever an artifact enters, you get to look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, put it into play or put it into your hand. If it's not a land, you can either leave it there or put it into your graveyard. It's like really good when you get a bunch of triggers going. They do have this Urza Saga. They've got an Asmo, a Thoughtseize, but my hand's pretty redundant for Thoughtseize. So it's Wraith, take an Asmo, get down to mURktide. One thing I completely forgot here is that Gilded Goose has flying. Why I forgot that, I have no idea whatsoever. But I was like, okay, I just hit him twice in the air. Hit him once this turn. Next, like, play a mURktide, chump block something, hit him once again next turn, game's over. But yeah, Gilded Goose puts a little bit of a damper on that plan. I forgot how much Moto started lagging during this recording part. So I don't remember for sure from the Thoughtseize, but I think they I know they know about mURktide. I can't remember if they knew about stub or not. Not that it makes like a huge difference one way or the other. Actually, let's see. Let me rewind to Thoughtseize. I mainly just want to know if I was bluffing or was I doing. No, I was just doing something stupid. They knew about stubborn denial, so there was no reason to exile 5 to play this mURktide. I should have just exiled 4, tapped 3 lands because they knew about stub, and exiling 4 instead of the full 5 just makes it a little bit easier to cast another mURktide if I hit another land. It doesn't really cost anything. So yeah, that was a mistake. Opponent gets a cookbook, so they're going to be able to start making constructs ridiculously large. All right. Decision making time. So I can chump block the construct. They can't make it any bigger at instant speed. I can chump block the construct, but I am dead to an attack out next turn unless I sit back with my mURktide. All right, I'm still dead to the constructs if I sit back with my other mURktide. So my out is like finding an answer to these constructs. And with that being the case, I think this mURktide staying alive another turn is more valuable. Like if I'm dead anyway and I need to find an answer to the constructs anyway, then why not hang back, see what happens, and we find like the perfect answer to the constructs. So we dress down on our own instep, so we shut off this Steel Seeker on their turn. We kill the constructs. We get to go back to our turn with a lethal mURktide in the air. Unfortunately, they do have the ability to make another food token and crack 2 of them, so they can gain up to 12. But if they do that, they don't get to make a construct token. So they don't make a construct. They discard a card, fetch, use up all their mana, use up all their foods. They do lose a lot of resources. If you remember in a previous video, the previous pretty fantastic thumbnail, we do say that a Death Shadow is never early, nor is he late. He arrives precisely when he means to. And we can see that on display right here as we get to attack down our opponent. They again have to fetch, make a food, discard a card, eat double food, go down to 1. So 1-1. Who is the stronger deck at being at 1 life? All right. If you're watching this, you probably see the punt. There is one part of this we don't know for sure. Didn't get a chance to ask my opponent. So if they had finale'd for 1 instead of 0, they could have just gotten a the cat, the Cauldron Familiar, and we die to the Cauldron Familiar trigger. There's a chance maybe either they aren't running Cauldron Familiar, which seems wrong, or B, they boarded it out because it's not good against mURktide Regent. But it is fantastic against Death Shadow. So I feel like you don't board it out. But either way, if my opponent did have Cauldron Familiar, then they should have familiared for, or finale'd for 1, gotten the Cauldron Familiar, and just killed me. So maybe they had their head, like their blinders on, and were just on the value train. Who knows? But either way, that's first of these two leagues with Dimir Shadow. I'll have the second league in the second video. List doing very well. I think that with the introduction of the new Lord of the Rings cards, we've seen a ton of Asmo food decks. So if you're playing in like a big event this weekend, I'd probably consider having access to Hercule's Recall or the extra EE just to help fight over some of those food tokens and ovens and stuff like that. Otherwise, Shadow of Mortality has been a very nice addition. It's been excellent against everything from scam to four color piles to some of the aggressive decks. Not so good against things like food, where it's just Shadow 5 through 6 or 5 and 6, but a little bit more difficult to turn on. But against decks with like Unholy Heat, Fatal Push, Prismatic Ending, it's done a lot of heavy lifting, and I've been pretty impressed with it. Other than that, second dress down in the main's been fine. I'm expecting kind of a resurgence in Saga decks. They've been on a decline recently. More creativity has made dress down a little bit worse. But I think with not only the Asmo food decks, but the introduction of the new Lord of the Rings stuff, uh, Elementals, I think it's going to get a big boost this weekend with people wanting to play the One Ring in aside or in alongside the new Halfling and Teferi, Ren, Omnath, all your legendary stuff like that. So that deck will probably be out and about in full force. And then the Asmo deck. So that's kind of what I'm looking for this weekend. Hopefully we get some positive results from the showcase challenge. Words are tough. But other than that, yeah, hope y'all have an awesome rest of your day. As always, if you want the deck list, it's down below. If you aren't following the YouTube channel already, feel free to hit subscribe. Let you know whenever some new videos go live. I also have the link to the Twitch channel down below if you want to catch a live stream. Otherwise, have an awesome rest of your day. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. Catch you back live later. Adios for now.